Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for your attendance. It is good to see so many people here tonight, and I hope we're going to have a very good debate. Now, tonight I will be chairing this meeting, which is a bit unusual. We had originally asked the University Debating Union to provide a chair, and they agreed, but unfortunately they've all gone on holiday, so it's left with me. But I can guarantee my impartiality because I will make no comments whatsoever about anything other than try to control this particular thing, okay? The procedure tonight is going to be quite simple. Each speaker will get 20 minutes. They can make up to 20 minutes. They can make their case, and then they give way to the next guy. After that, there will be a 20 to 30 minutes question and answer session. Could I ask you, please, if you need to make...
Sorry, can you speak up?
If you need to make a preamble to your questions, can you keep the preamble very, very short and keep the question very short because we are very short of time. And eventually, at the end, this will be followed by a vote. I've asked a couple of tellers from each side to actually go around and actually count the hands. Now, tonight our speakers are Terry Sanderson, who is president of the National Secular Society. Terry is also a writer, blogger. I hate that word, but he's a blogger. And he's latterly, I believe, a playwright to boot. And I suspect that there is no more none other than this guy here, David Hobborn, who would love to boot this man. Anyway, the Reverend Dr. David Hobborn. David is the principal of the St. John's College at Theological College. And I'm sure he would be the very first to debate with Bertrand Russell, who said that theology was the study of absolutely nothing. Now, so, ladies and gentlemen, these are our speakers tonight, Terry and David. Thank you very much. So I now call upon Terry to move that this House believes all religions should embrace secularism.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I better start off by saying that I noticed yesterday, David, you were tweeting your followers to pray for you because you were up against me. Well, I do hope you don't think I'm some kind of demonic presence that you have to defend yourself against, because really...
We pray for all things.
Oh, right, okay, well good, I'm glad about that, that's reassuring. Anyway, I think one of the most poignant headlines I've seen recently was in a Pakistani newspaper. And it simply said, Christians call for secularism. Anyone who follows the foreign news will know that in some areas of Pakistan, the persecution of Christians is endemic. Churches are burned, pastors are murdered, people are forced under torture to convert to Islam. No wonder Christians there want secularism. They've come to understand that secularism is their best hope. It could help them gain the right to worship in the way that they want to, as it would every other minority in the country. It would also help protect people who have no religious feelings, whereas at present, just admitting such a thing in Pakistan and in many other areas of the Islamic world could put your life at risk. Secular laws would not permit particular religious doctrines to be dictated into law. A secular state has a justice system based on impartiality and not Holy Writ. It would not permit blasphemy laws that are so easily abused and misused. It would not contain privileges for one particular religion that put others at a disadvantage. In Burma, there's a small minority of Muslims called the Rohingya. They're regarded by the Burmese in much the same way that the Roma people are regarded by most of Europe. They're needlessly and mercilessly bullied and persecuted by the Buddhist monks that wield so much power in Burma. Maybe they would find secularism would improve the quality of their lives. Instead, Buddhist nationalism increases, and so does the persecution and destruction of the Rohingya. The persecution of religious minorities by overwhelming majorities is rife around the world. Muslim persecute Hindu. Hindu persecute Sikh. Recently, in Iran, a group of Christians was given 80 lashes because they drank communion wine in defiance of Sharia law. And Jews, well, Jews know everything there is to know about persecution. When the government issues figures on hate crimes, it will tell of a rise in anti-Semitism in Britain. Jews are facing attacks. What the figures don't tell us is who's doing the persecuting. The collectors of the government statistics on religious hate crimes don't identify the religion of the perpetrators, only the victims. So, you have to dig down more carefully into these cases to see that in most instances, it's Islamic radicals who vent their fury at the Jewish community by desecrating their graveyards, attacking Orthodox Jews in the street and threatening Jewish schools. Secularism can't stop this. We shouldn't forget that on paper, Pakistan is a secular constitution. It's been ruthlessly overwhelmed by gun-toting and bomb-throwing radicals and their clerical bosses. A secular constitution can make it illegal for the state to engage in religious persecution, but it cannot stop religions going to war against each other. The Arab Spring started out as a great hope that secularism could be embraced by the many warring factions within Islam, that countries like Tunisia and Egypt could unshackle themselves from the extremes of Islam and bring peace and prosperity instead of sectarian superstition and conflict. But as soon as the dictators were overthrown, the Islamists moved in, determined to use democracy to overturn democracy. And they almost succeeded. The Muslim Brotherhood gained power because they promised not to be extreme in their religion. That promise was not kept. Now the Muslim Brotherhood has been removed from power, and political chaos once more reigns as factions fight for control. Attempts to create a constitution that is to some extent at least secular have not succeeded. In Syria, though the dictator has not been overthrown, and now a sectarian war of such cruelty has arisen that it beggars the imagination. As rival orthodoxies vie for power, hundreds of thousands of innocent lives are lost. It's unlikely that a secular constitution would stop this madness, but it might have prevented it starting in the first place. But the motion we have before us today is this House believes all religions should embrace secularism. We at the National Secular Society believe that all democratic government should embrace secularism too. It's an essential adjunct to democracy. It stops governments being hijacked by one particular religion, and then the state machinery being used to enforce in law the doctrines of that religion. At the same time, it does not repress or suppress religion. Secularism has must be a mutual compact between religion and state. They must each agree to respect each other's boundaries. In a secular democracy, the church will not seek to dictate legal or social policy, and in return, the state will not interfere with the church as it goes about its business of saving souls. It will not seek to control the practice of religion, so long as those practices do not interfere with the rights of others. There's only one nation on earth that was founded with a secular constitution, and that's the United States of America. Most European countries that now have secular constitutions had to fight hard and long to free themselves from the grip of the Vatican. England, of course, got rid of the Vatican only to have it replaced by the Anglican Church, something that still hangs on in our constitution to prevent us becoming a modern secular democracy. The people of Britain are in the main secular, in the sense that they have largely abandoned the churches, but the state remains resolutely non-secular. The national debate last week about whether Britain is a Christian country remains unresolved. Nobody yet knows what the Prime Minister meant when he used the term Christian country. Yesterday, the Sunday Telegraph published an opinion poll into commission from Morey. The first question it asked was, do you regard yourself as, and then a list of options that included a practicing Christian, a non-practicing Christian, or non-religious. 14% claimed that they were practicing Christians, a figure that's out of sync with church attendance, but we'll leave that. 38% said they were non-practicing Christians, and 41% said they were non-religious. Now, we're told that because a majority regard themselves as Christian in some sense, then this is a Christian country. But the 41% who say they have no religion, and the 5% who belong to other religions, and the 2% who said they didn't know, must count for something. It is a minority, yes, but it's approaching half the population. They cannot simply be told that they're living in a Christian country that, in theory, relegates them to some kind of inferior status. But I mustn't exaggerate. The people belonging to this enormous minority don't feel inferior, because to all intents and purposes, Britain is a secular country. The Church of England has accepted in reality that its establishment brings very few benefits and an awful lot of disadvantages. I heard Giles Fraser, the prominent media vicar, the other day, making the case for disestablishment. He thinks the Church of England would be stronger and more honest and freer to make its voice heard if it was separate from the state. That's certainly what the churches in the USA have found. There is no establishment there, but there's certainly no shortage of Christian power. As I said, secularism can't stop religions hating and fighting each other. It cannot stop fanatics trying to impose their religion by violence and murder. But our motion asked, should religions themselves embrace secularism? Actually, this is the only solution. It is, if in some fantasy time in the future, then many religions and their many offshoots could say, we embrace secularism and mean it. An unprecedented peace would fall on the earth. Religions would respect each other's right to exist, even if their doctrines are entirely contradictory. They would accept that their teachings are mutually blasphemous, as they are, but would not try to eradicate each other because of it. They would accept that none of them could have temporal power, and that the neutrality of government and politics would be accepted. Fantasy? I'm afraid, yes, fantasy. You only have to look at the way some religions regard human rights to see the impossibility of what our motion asks. Universal human rights, as expressed and defined in the Charter of the United Nations, are an innovation of genius. I will accept that many of those who drafted the Charter were Christians, and I salute their inspiration. But human rights, with their respect for the individual's right to construct their own lives in their own way, so long as they remain within the law and do not trample on the rights of others, is not a concept with which religion always sits easily. People making their own decisions and living by their own conscience might mean they do not always live in the way that religion wants to dictate for them. To get round this, we now have the Organisation of Islamic Countries, which likes to present itself as a sort of United Nations of the Muslim world, inventing its own charter of Islamic human rights. Islamic human rights. Think about it. In what way are Islamic human rights different from the universal human rights? What human rights could a Muslim have or not have that a Christian or a Hindu could or could not have? And so the ultimate secular document, the United Nations Charter of Universal Human Rights, is immediately balkanized. Human rights become a sectarian issue. Although Islamic nations have signed the UN Convention, they carelessly disregard it. Some make changing religion into a criminal offence, punishable by death. They abuse it when they render women second-class citizens. They demean it when they refuse to employ people because of their religion, or their gender, or their sexuality. They undermine it when they introduce blasphemy laws or make apostasy a crime. It isn't anywhere near that in this country, and that is, of course, because, as I said, we're secular in all but name. But the principle is the same. When equality legislation was proposed in our Parliament, an extension of the concept of human rights that protects individuals from unfair treatment in employment or in the receipt of goods and services, immediately there were calls from faith groups for religious exemptions. These exemptions go beyond merely protecting directly religious jobs such as vicars and imams, and extending it to having the right not to employ homosexuals or people who are similarly morally unacceptable to a particular religion. We've allowed that in Britain. In some state-sponsored schools, namely those that are for some unfathomable reason still run by religious organisations, it is permissible to deny employment to people who are not of the same faith and to dismiss people who get pregnant outside of marriage or cohabit without matrimony. Only last week, a man in Cardiff was sacked from his job as the head of a Catholic school, which incidentally is paid for by the taxpayer, because he'd split up from his wife. Religious exemptions such as these make a mockery of the ambition of equality for all. They make real the Orwellian concept that all men are equal, but some are more equal than others. But there's no such thing as partial equality. It's an oxymoron. But as far as homosexuals are concerned, that is their status in equality law. They have compromised equality. Religions have been accustomed to enjoying power and privilege. The Church of England is no exception. Right from its beginning in Tudor times, it's exerted extraordinary power. In the 19th century, it had the power to control who entered Parliament, only practicing Anglicans. Who had the right to university education, only practicing Anglicans. It had the right by law to coerce people into church and to levy hefty tithes on them. Much of this influence has now been taken away from it as society is secularised, but it still enjoys an exceptional and privileged place in our constitutional arrangements. Now that it cannot fine people for not going to church and attendance is truly voluntary, its congregations have dwindled, its influence on the personal lives of the population at large has declined to almost nothing. The Church of England is now a very small denomination in a country mainly indifferent to it. Its position as a church established by law is unsustainable. It cannot continue for much longer. We hope that it will be able to accept the situation and to remove itself from its constitutional place with dignity and good grace. I hope, after all, it won't have to be kicked out. In other words, I would like the Church of England to embrace secularism, and I would like the Catholic Church to do likewise, and the Muslim community, and the Hindus, and the Sikhs, and even the Scientologists and the Mormons. They might think it's an extraordinary idea, but I refer back to the headline I cited at the beginning from the newspaper in Pakistan. Christians demand secularism. The religious demographics of this country are changing rapidly. If present trends continue, non-believers will be the majority quite soon. Other religions are expanding while Christianity declines. Soon there will be more Muslim worshippers than there will be Anglicans or Catholics, or all the Christian sects put together. Soon the Muslims will have a good case for having a place in the state along with the Anglican Church. I don't want that. And I suspect few others want it, including many Muslims. Which is why I think religions should embrace secularism and should observe the demarcation line that is so essential between the various faiths and the state. Individual Christians and Muslims and so on can, of course, take part in the democratic process, just like any other member of society. Individual religious believers would enjoy the full protection of the human rights and equalities laws, but religious organisations would not. Human rights are for humans, individual humans, not for organisations or ideologies. So, to sum up, I think religious people must stop regarding secularism with suspicion as a bogeyman that's coming to get them. It is not their enemy. It is not militant atheism out to ban religion or crush their faith. It simply says that your faith is as important, but no more important than anyone else's. If we could all agree to that, we could make real progress in interfaith relations. Peace would be easier to maintain, but given human nature, not that easy. But it can only happen if religion takes it upon itself to embrace secularism. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. Now I'm going to call upon the Reverend Dr. David Holborn to speak against the motion. Do you want this?
Thank you very much, Dennis. I'd like to thank all of you for asking me to speak here tonight, although I must confess that when Dennis invited me, an evangelical Anglican theologian, to debate here at the Nottingham Secular Society on the subject of secularism, the image that first came to my mind was that of Daniel in the lion's den. Yeah. Then again, on second thoughts, that story turned out okay in the end. And like Daniel, I do believe in a miraculous God, so we'll see where we go with the vote when we come to it. As some of you know, this debate was originally scheduled to have taken place last October, but had to be cancelled due to high winds, making it impossible for Terry to travel up here to Nottingham. Well, as I've read the headlines this week, I'm tempted to suggest that those winds were an act of God, because what might have been a rather more abstract debate back in the autumn has been given real pertinence, hasn't it, by David Cameron's claim in the Church Times that Britain's a Christian country, by 50 leading secularists and atheists penning a letter of protest at his supposedly divisive comments, and by subsequent interventions from Dominic Greevy and Duncan Smith, Archbishop Justin Welby and Archbishop Justin's predecessor, Rowan Williams. Yet while it would be tempting to focus on that whole furore this evening, our motion is not, in fact, asking us to consider specifically whether Britain is a Christian country, or even more specifically whether the Church of England should be disestablished, despite Terry's focus on that. Rather, our motion is asking us to consider something much more broad-ranging, namely whether all religions should embrace secularism. So I hope it honours the terms of our motion if from time to time I illustrate my opposition to it with reference to the Cameron controversy, but if I concentrate on the more essential and more fundamental terms in which it's been framed. As I do that, I want to stress that the wording immediately prompts some crucial questions. First, what's meant here by religion? Not surprisingly, the NSS website uses the word religion a lot, but a clear definition is pretty hard to come by. On balance, the NSS leans towards what might be called the metaphysical definition of religion, that which sees it defined by belief in a god or gods, and which John Haldane describes as seeking solutions to the observed facts of moral and physical evil, limitation and vulnerability, particularly in the face of death. Then again, there are hints elsewhere on the NSS site of the anthropological understanding of scholars like Clifford Geertz, who defines religion not so much in terms of theism as by cultural and ritual processes, or as he puts it, symbols which act to establish powerful moods and motivations in people through conceptions of a general order of existence. On those terms, it's possible to cast non-theistic and even atheistic belief systems like Theravada Buddhism and Marxism as religions. Now, this definitional ambiguity about religion is significant, not just in and of itself, but because it goes to the heart of what our motion actually means by secularism. To be blunt, while secularism here might appear to describe a benign level playing field in which the state fosters equality of belief systems, both religious and non-religious, when read in context, it can be seen to imply a more militantly humanistic and even atheistic agenda, one which should be resisted not only by Anglican theologians like me, but by any religionist who believes that doing God does have, and must in fact have, a public as well as a private dimension. You see, if religion is a tricky concept that needs defining, we should take even more care over secularism. In the Secular Charter published by the NSS itself, two distinct definitions of secularism can be discerned. First, as I've said, is the principle of equality of religions and beliefs before the law. So far, so apparently good. But the second definition is more problematic, much more problematic. This is the definition of secularism as an active effort to separate the state from religious institutions and influences, to make the public square a religion-free, or more specifically, a God-free zone. Taken at face value, I have far fewer issues with that first benign version of secularism than with the second. Indeed, if all that was meant by secularism was equality and diversity of religion and belief, I'd probably not be opposing the motion tonight. In practice, however, secularism all too often extends from this first definition to the second, namely the active attempt to exclude religion from public life and civic influence. And it's for that reason that I said yes to Dennis's invitation, and for that reason that I'm stood here now. This second, more aggressive form of secularism goes beyond freedom of religion, beyond even the constitutional distinction of religion from the state. It pursues an agenda which has shaped the National Secular Society since its inception in 1866, but which has been played down in more recent times, not least by Terry himself. Perhaps because of the extraordinary resurgence of religion worldwide in the past few decades, and perhaps because of the growing diversity of religious expression here in multicultural Britain. The agenda in question is the agenda, frankly, of politicised atheism, or as a still downloadable pamphlet from the NSS website by former President David Tribe describes it, militant, yes, militant secular humanism. Indeed, although the NSS more prominently proclaims that secularism is not atheism, that it simply provides a framework for a democratic society and that it doesn't seek to challenge the tenets of any particular religion, I have to say that this is belied by the campaigning thrust of the NSS, which remains effectively concentrated on excluding religion from civic life, whether in the form of religiously based schools, government-backed faith-based welfare projects, or public service chaplaincies. As I'm sure many of you know, the term secularism derives from the Latin saeculum, meaning this age or this world, rather than the age to come, or heaven. And quite clearly, there is a form of secularism which is philosophically wedded to scientific materialism and the denial of the supernatural, a strain which is ideologically committed to public atheism over against public religion. The founder of the National Secular Society, Charles Bradlaugh, certainly saw his atheism as closely and inextricably bound up with his secularism, and devoted comparable amounts of time to advocating for each. Even today, the New Look NSS showcases a range of honorary associates who are better known for their ideological advocacy of atheism than for any promotion of secularism as such. Richard Dawkins, Ricky Gervais, A.C. Grayling, Jonathan Meades, Terry Pratchett, Philip Pullman, Jonathan Miller, Joan Smith, and Polly Toynbee, to name just a few. Tellingly, many of those very same names appeared as signatories to that Daily Telegraph letter decrying David Cameron's assertion that Britain remains a Christian country. So again, we come back to that fundamental question of definition. When the NSS asked religions to embrace secularism, as Terry and our motion are asking them to do this evening, what is actually meant by secularism? The dedicated campaigning atheism of these honorary associates, or the apparently more neutral, pluralistic secularism that Terry himself seems to prefer? Our motion, and be clear about this, folks, our motion makes no distinction between the two. And because it doesn't, adherents of any socially responsible religious tradition, and maybe even adherents of that more benign form of secularism, should vote against it, purely on definitional, analogical, and dare I say it, rational grounds. Our public life today is enriched as a matter of fact, by a diversity of religious communities, all have their part to play in our civic discourse, all have a stake in the body politic. Ostensibly, Terry might agree with this in principle. But in fact, denunciation of faith schools, hospital chaplains and faith-based welfare bespeak a more intolerant kind of secularism. One that would have religious citizens confine the religious aspect of their lives behind closed doors, to the privacy of their own homes, churches, temples, synagogues and mosques. This is the model of secularism that pertains in the French system of laïcité. And I have to say, it's a dishonest, disingenuous sort of secularism. One that claims a civic neutrality, which is in fact anything but neutral, which is indeed a myth. You see, to require religion to be privatised in this way is fundamentally to misunderstand the nature of religious traditions, the vast majority of which do not see themselves as personal hobbies or recreations, but as holistic systems dedicated to the common good. And here's the thing, folks. Civic religion remains strikingly popular in this country. So to sweep it, or as Terry I think put it, kick it from public life in the name of equality would in fact be deeply undemocratic. Recent surveys have shown that 80% of the English population support church schools as promoting good behaviour and positive attitudes among young people. 1 million pupils attend Church of England schools specifically. 1,600 C of E chaplains alone offer tangible support to people of all faiths and none in hospitals, prisons, schools, universities, colleges and the armed forces. And chaplaincies are hardly exclusive to the C of E. Many other churches and faith groups contribute to them, and even, of late, the British Humanist Association. And let's not forget the numerous food banks, credit unions, hospices, care homes, youth clubs, homeless shelters, aid charities and housing trusts run by churches and other faith groups, some of which receive government money and even some of which don't. Our debate tonight might be much wider than the current Cameron debate, but it's worth noting that leaders of other faith groups, from Anil Banat of the Hindu Council through Farooq Murad of the Muslim Council of Great Britain, to Lord Indrajit Singh of the network of Sikh organisations, have all endorsed the idea that Britain remains a Christian country, and in some cases that the establishment of the Church of England benefits their faith communities and society in general. Sure, fewer people consider themselves Christian now than a decade ago, but 59% is still a majority, not, as Terry coyly put it, a large minority. Sure, fewer people attend church, but 1.7 million are in C of E services alone at least once per month on average, and 12 million visit cathedrals every year. Sure, historic free churches are in decline, but newer Pentecostal and charismatic churches are growing and making ever more impact on public life. This is hardly privatised religion, retreating into the shadows. Granted, 41% of folk may call themselves non-religious, but non-involvement in religion is hardly the same thing as committed secularism. Terry can confirm, but as far as I can work it out, the current membership of the NSS is no more than about 5,000. Respectable enough, but hardly a mass movement poised to see religion off from civic life. To reiterate, there's no such thing as a neutral or naked public square. All of us enter it with presuppositions and pre-commitments, secularists and atheists alike. So, in a free society, all of us need to engage in public life with graciousness and respect for the other. It's arrogant, though, of secularists to suggest that their ideology is better equipped to define and manage this diversity than the public theologies of various faith groups. And even if it were possible to exclude religion from civic life, one might well ask whether secularism could deliver anything approaching the sort of moral infrastructure and social cohesion which have so long been provided by religious traditions. I don't mean to suggest by this that non-religious people can't be moral. Of course, I'm not suggesting that for a moment. But for thousands of years, religious traditions have delivered practical public benefits to humanity, which secular systems have often failed to acknowledge or emulate. Religions invest the basic processes of birth and death with dignity and significance. They generate sustainable communities with shared principles and goals. They inform and enhance family life. They offer a hope beyond the grave, which enables people to bequeath a positive legacy to their successors, a legacy which transcends mere reproduction. Thus, in most religious understandings, the order of a universe made by a loving creator is inextricably linked with the love, peace and justice of a positively ordered life in a decently ordered society. And by the way, the origins of human rights are based in that concept of the link between a creator God who orders the world and an ordered civic sphere. And since our motion doesn't confine ourselves to Britain, it's worth saying that this applies internationally as much as in the UK. In the 60s and 70s, social scientists routinely predicted the global eclipse of religion. The sociologist Peter Berger famously declared in 1967 that by the 21st century, religious believers would exist only in small sects huddled against a worldwide secular culture. Yet by the 1990s, Berger was forced to pronounce that declaration absurd. Indeed, as Professor Grace Davey confirms, Europe is now the exception, not the rule, where religious decline is concerned. In China, South Korea, Brazil, and other economically advancing cultures, it's going from strength to strength. Globally, religious affiliation is growing at a rate of 1.5% per annum. Against this background, the Catholic theologian Hans Kuhn has initiated a movement among historic world faiths to stress those things that they can bring to public life together. Not the war and genocide and slaughter that Terry focused on, but in fact the values of non-violence and respect for life as embodied in the work and witness of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, a culture of solidarity which prioritises communal networks, an emphasis on truth-telling and tolerance in human relationships, and the common dignity of all human beings, derived from their status as children of God. Again, secularists may claim that it's possible to construct a similar sort of morality without recourse to the divine. But religion got there first, and as we've seen, it's not going away. Religion can inspire change for the better, because it offers a vision of the whole of life, not only its physical and material aspects, but its moral and metaphysical dimensions too. As a Christian, I find that vision uniquely fulfilled in the one whom John describes in his Gospel as the Word made flesh, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the Son of the living God. In Jesus I see rationality in action, wisdom with a human face. To me, he satisfies men and women's finest religious instincts, their highest ideals, their greatest ethical claims. But Jesus called for the love of one's neighbour, and on that basis, Christian philosophers from John Locke onwards have stressed the value of toleration. Mr. Chairman, if secularism means equal rights for the beliefs and practices of religious and non-religious people, then I might count myself a secularist. But if it means the systematic exclusion of religion from public life on the false assumption that secular humanism, scientific materialism or atheism is more neutral or benign, then I am most certainly not a secularist. Granted, religions have at times behaved immorally and even tyrannically when afforded civic power. But on this reading, so have secularists. And arguably, in modern times, the secularist record is worse. Despite the subtitle of David Tribe's pamphlet, I'm sure there are non-militant secularists. I'm sure many of them are sat here this evening. Terry seems to be one, and maybe many tonight here would support his version of secularism. But that doesn't detract from the fact that secularism in another guise drove the Jacobins, Stalin, Mao and Pol Pot. I'm not saying that all secularists want to eject religion forcibly from the public square any more than I would expect that a thinking secularist like Terry would imply that all religionists are theocratic fundamentalists. What I am saying is that the contribution of religion to our common life has been immense. It remains as necessary for a healthy society as it ever was. Attempts to oust it from the public square have a disreputable past and do not bear repeating. We need public religion today as the vast mass of humanity has always needed it. We can argue in the fine details of how secularism has been defined in theory, but too often in practice, secularism has shown itself as negative and hostile to religion, and particularly to public and civic religion. Mr. Chairman, for these reasons and the others I've given, I oppose the motion.
Well, thank you very much, David and Terry. We now have questions. So anyone? There's a chap there.
Thank you. I think you're very brave, first of all, for coming and talking to a crowd of people who mostly think what you're saying is rubbish. But you seem to completely sidestepped the issue of the disestablishment of the Church of England. Because even if we grant that the majority of the population are Christian, if you subtract the Catholics, the Methodists, the Baptists, the Seventh-day Adventists, and one of the other kind of weird branches of Christianity are from that number, we certainly are not a Church of England country. The Church of England is very definitely a minority. So how do you stand on the disestablishment of the Church? Can you comment on that?
Okay, happily do that. I started off life as a Congregationalist, like Tony Benn, and indeed, as I understand it, it was Terry saying that he went to a Congregationalist church when he was younger, which of course is a non-established, disestablished church, or never was established, and became an Anglican latterly in my life. And I didn't become an Anglican principally because of the establishment of the Church of England. I became an Anglican because the Anglican tradition exists across the world in 40-odd provinces, in 5 continents, all of whom, bar the province of the Church of England, or the 2 provinces of the Church of England, are not established. So let me stress that that's not the main thing for me. I want to underline that as an Anglican Christian happening to be in England, my priorities are the gospel of Jesus Christ. They're the Christian faith, whether it's expressed in an Anglican form or a Pentecostal form or a Methodist form or whatever. And I work very hard on behalf of the Church of England in unity with other denominations that are not established. So it's quite a long way down my list of priorities, the establishment of the Church of England. Having said that, it's a historic legacy which I would say is a mixture of missteps and benign steps. So it's also a legacy which has been changed and acculturated by the CLE down the centuries. We're no longer in the days of Henry VIII or Elizabeth I. At the end of the 17th century, the Church of England itself participated in a compact between the Church and the State, which created a constitutional monarchy, a separation between the Crown and Parliament, and between bishops and the Crown, and so on. And in the 19th century, gradually, it allowed for test acts and other laws which require people to affirm the 39 Articles to be repealed. And at the beginning of the 20th century, it created its own General Synod to take a lot of that state-controlled power back into itself. So if in some future point there is a rolling back further of establishment or even a disestablishment of the Church of England, Anglican Christians in England will go on doing what I've described they are doing for public benefit and in the public square. My argument was not to do with the disestablishment or establishment of the Church of England. It was to do with the motion, which was not even about Christianity, it was about all religions, and it was about secularism. So I mentioned it, but it wasn't the main focus of our debate tonight.
Yes, sir.
I just begin with one remark, and that is that one of the signatories to the letter that you referred to is the Secretary General of the Unitarian and Free Churches. But let me take up your point that secularism seeks to exclude religion from the public sphere. I don't think you're right there in the sense that you can be informed by your religion, but that is very different from giving it a privileged position within the public sphere. It has got to argue like any other group. The other thing, if I may just develop it, is that we must look to the future and not concentrate on the past. And looking to the future, it is very important that we be able to bring up our young children, perhaps with the sort of morality that you were referring to. But they are not going to be convinced with that if they are told that it is dependent on your religion. It is rather something that is shared by all religions and people not in religion. And when we note that young people, 25% only, are believing in God these days, we have to ask, how are we going to educate them in this way? So the imposition of faith schools and faith interpretations of religious education, which I think should become education in humanity, is something that certainly is not secular, but certainly ought not to be a sensible way of going about educating. So how are you going to cope with this?
Well, there's a whole load of stuff there.
With the
So I'm going to pick it. You talk about, firstly, you talk about privilege in the public square. I prefer to talk about proportional representation of religion in the public square. That chaplaincy example is quite a good one, because National Secular Society campaigns pretty aggressively against chaplaincy. And, well, on your website, it's one of your key campaigns.
Yes, of course, but not against the chaplaincy, it's against the NHS paying for the chaplaincy.
Well, let me just unpack that a bit more. Chaplaincies represent the people who are in hospitals. The majority of people in this country have some kind of religious association, affiliation or sympathy. I've shown that. While they're in hospital, they're stuck there often for quite a long period of time. And the argument for a multi-faith approach to chaplaincy, let me stress that, a pluralistic approach to chaplaincy, a diverse approach to chaplaincy, is that there's enough of a critical mass of people in hospital at any one time with religious affiliation who need pastoral care, and not just the occasional visit of their minister, but people who are specialised in both the medical context and in the religious context. So it's just about the representation of people in the public square. Well, the statistics on people with religious affiliation tells you what you need to know. The argument here is about the, as I've said, unless you define secularism, which is not done in the motion, it's about the representation of people of faith in the public square and what place they have in public life. If there is the majority that I've outlined who still are affiliated to or sympathetic to religion, then religion has to play a role in public life. And that means pastorally and in terms of people of professional training who can help them in that public sphere. So for me, privilege is a misleading term when a lot of the involvement of religion in public life is ecumenical, it's diverse, and it's multi-faith. You also mentioned about church schools. Nobody has to go to a church school. Nobody's forced to go to a church school.
Sometimes they do.
There is a plurality and diversity. There's a plurality and diversity of school types, academy schools, free schools. There is a landscape, a mixed landscape of schools.
Not everywhere.
And people who choose to send their children to church school do so knowing that there's a particular context, as there is in every school. When a parent makes a choice of school, there may be an atheist headmaster, as my headmaster was at my secondary school, who actually broke the law in not allowing, at that time, religious assemblies. So there was a particular ideological cast to my state grammar school. This is underlining the point I made about there's no such thing as the neutral public square. All religious voices have a right to play their part in that public life, as indeed do atheists, agnostics and secularists.
I'm only allowed to be a co-opted member of my local faculty.
I can just about see you. So I've got lights in the eyes. Yeah, yes.
I'm sorry, I hope this was me.
And then could we have a question after this guy? Could we have a question for Kevin?
No, for...
Can I just comment on the last thing? Can I just give my answer to the question? because there were things said then that just are not true. Some people don't have the choice about whether they go to a faith school or not, particularly in rural areas where the church school is the only school for miles around. They've got to send their kids there whether they want to or not. And we're getting an awful lot of emails from people around the country at the moment because the allocation of places at school has just been made. A lot of people are very unhappy. In fact, we had some parents last week complaining that their kids have been allocated places in a school run by Sikhs, and they're not Sikhs. They don't want to be Sikhs, and they don't want their children to be Sikhs. But they were given places at these schools without any kind of alternative. And that's true also some Christian schools. Parents have told that their children have been allocated sometimes in schools that have got spare places. They don't want them to go. There is no alternative. And also, you said, you know, in days gone by, kids were made to go to assembly, to worship and so on. That's still true today. It's still the law. They have to go to a daily act of mainly Christian worship. And in any other context, in any other human rights context, that would be seen as outrageous. People should not be forced to worship, even if they're children.
By the same token, let's flip it around. Look at it the other way. If you're a Christian living in a remote area and there isn't a Christian school around, you may pay your taxes in a system which enfranchises that large percentage of people, between 70 and 80%, who think that church schools are a good idea, but not all Christians are able to send their children to
free
church
buses
school.
to take them miles to the nearest faith school.
Well, buses are not exclusive to church schools.
With the best will in the world, should schools be neutral? You know, what
Neutral? What do you mean by neutral? I told you in the state sector I had a headmaster who systematically excluded any religious expression from the school. I don't see that as neutral, I see that as ideologically skewed. There's no such thing as a naked public square. We all exist within it, and the attempt to push people of religious conviction to the margins is biased, it is ideologically disproportionate, and it has no place, I think, in a democratic society. The majority of people in this country have expressed this. They think that church schools are a good thing. They pay their taxes, those taxes go to the education department. I think it's absolutely in keeping with modern pluralism that education
Why
should
should
have
there
a
be
religious
religion
flavour.
in schools? Well, if I go to a shoe shop, I don't expect religion when I buy shoes. If I go to a butcher's, I don't expect to get religious meat. Why should I get religion in schools? Schools are for education. They're not to religious indoctrination. That's what churches are for. If you want religion for your children, send them to church.
I'll set my cards on the table and say that I'm an independent Christian, but I'm not an Anglican. I study at St John's with the view to going on doing a PhD in London, so my remarks come with a load of bias. My question's for Terry, and it's just a point of clarification really. When you say you don't want religion, particularly the Church of England, to be influencing in the public scale, what do you mean by that? Are people allowed to express faith opinions? Are you allowed to have an opinion that is motivated wholeheartedly by your faith? Or does everything need to be couched in a certain way? So it's, a point of clarification, are you dictating religion or influencing religion? Which way are we enabling, in your view of secularism, people to come into the public square?
Sorry, this is stuck somewhere. I think that every religious person should have the same right to their religion and to express their religion in any context whatsoever. And so we have a Prime Minister who is self-confessedly a Christian all of a sudden. And we have several members of the Cabinet who are really religious and put their cards on the table about it quite openly and frequently. Baroness Varsi, Eric Pickles, and now we've got some of the Lib Dems, Nigel Farage, who was saying he was a committed Christian on Sunday. So these are people who are Christian in public life. I've got no problem with that, none whatsoever. And if their religion influences the way that they vote, that's fine, as long as everybody knows where they're coming from. We had, I remember a while back, a Labour cabinet minister called Ruth Kelly, who was a Catholic, which was fine. But she didn't tell anybody that she was also a member of Opus Dei. Now, Opus Dei is very strict and tries to place people in influential positions to promote Catholic doctrine. And when the time came to vote for Labour policy, which included things like gay marriage, she voted against or she abstained. And of course, when you're in the cabinet, you're supposed to vote according to the decisions that the cabinet makes. So she was turfed out. But that was because she was dishonest about where she was coming from. But I've got no problem with people bringing their religion into public life. But I think it shouldn't be privileged. At the moment, we have got privilege of religion in our parliament. We've got 26 bishops of the Church of England in there. And also other people appointed to the House of Lords because of their religious past, such as the chief rabbi and other religious leaders who get an automatic place, seemingly nowadays, in the House of Lords. So you have a huge religious influence in there, as of right, and I don't think that can be justified.
On the House of Lords question, would you support, for example, a kind of proportional system? I'm too young to really run for anything in the House of Lords, although that's not oxymoron. Would you support, for example, having specifically atheist or secular peers, Jewish peers, so on, proportional to communities, or is that not how you would?
No, I want people who can bring their skills to. You get appointed to the House of Lords, you can't be elected to it. So I want people who are going to bring really skills that they can use when legislation is on the table, when they've got to make decisions about what our law is going to be. They have got particular expertise in areas, and that's true at the moment. You've got peers from all walks of life who can bring their expertise, but they're appointed because they do have those skills, not because they were bishops. If a bishop has got a particular skill to bring, fine, let's appoint him, but they're there because they're bishops, not because they're particularly skilled in anything.
Rose.
I'd just like to go back to the point about faith schools. In the rural Nottinghamshire village where I was brought up, you only had two choices, the church school or the chapel school. So I went to the church school. But on the plus side, I have to say that the religious education class run every week by our local vicar did more to turn me into a young atheist than anything else.
We've all got our horror stories. I mean, I'm sure many Christians can tell horror stories about atheist coercion. But the point is that in a country where a large number of people have a religious affiliation and pay their taxes, they have a right to express the fact that their religious affiliation might be represented in the public sphere. My concern is that in a motion which doesn't define what secularism is, we could go with a relatively benign, sort of democratic, diverse view of secularism, or we could go with the view of secularism taken by the Fontana Dictionary of Modern Thought, which hasn't got a Christian axe to grind at all. You look it up, and it says, opposition to religion, see atheism. There is, as I've spelt out, a pretty strong heritage in the NSS, as well as other organisations, of a pretty militantly atheistic form of secularism. Now, I'm saying to everybody in the room tonight, look at the motion. We've kind of fixated quite a lot on a very, very specific manifestation of religion and the nation and religion and state, the establishment of the Church of England. But the motion is very broad. All religions should embrace secularism, it says. So in that context, I would ask you just to interrogate the motion as people who do think rationally and recognise that there are numerous different forms of secularism. And if you vote for this motion, you're effectively voting in those forms of quite militant, coercive secularism, which want to push religion unwarrantably to the margins. Potentially you're doing that. Look at the terms of the motion and vote with your conscience.
Right, we have four more questions. There's one here, one there, and a chap at the back, and to his right as well.
One over here as well.
Oh, okay, come on. Can you make a question very, very quick, please? You first.
Yes, the case for religious morality having a superiority
I didn't say that.
Because all right, well, you interpret it how you like. You said you got there first. Well, of course you did. Because if you have read that magnificent book by the late Christopher Hitchens, God is Not Great, he talked about a time when religions came into being and created their moralities. And he said, and he's quite right of course, that at that time no one knew what was going on. And if no one knows what's going on, people are free to invent what they like. And religions were invented when people didn't know what was going on and could then invent what they liked. Where there is knowledge and understanding and education, secularism, anti-religion thrives, religion dies. And let me quote one example of this which I'm very fond of, and I promise not to take too long. The case of the Chilean miners trapped underground for 3 or 4 days, maybe more. I remember being thrilled staying up all night to watch them being rescued. And they were relatively uneducated folk, and when they got to the top, having been rescued, they were effusive in their praise of God for setting them free. Now, it wasn't God that set them free. It was a triumph of international cooperation and scientific endeavour by many nations getting together to create the machinery that would get them out. If God, if he existed, was responsible for anything, it was getting them down there in the first place. And the thanks for getting them out should go to secular, scientific, rational knowledge.
Secular, scientific, rational industrialisation mined that mine and put them down there on the same argument. This is prone, the way you're going, to what C.S. Lewis once called chronological chauvinism. The fact that we happen to live 21 centuries after the early Christians doesn't necessarily mean that we're more intellectually capable than they are. I mean, St. Augustine, for example, an early church theologian, one of the finest minds that there's ever been, who incidentally argued for that benign form of secularism after a fashion that I was talking about earlier. Certainly a distinction between the power of the church and the power of the state. So let's not get into this game of just because we are where we are in modern life, we're necessarily intellectually superior. It doesn't work that way.
No, we are running short. Right. Yeah, we are running short of time. So very quickly, then one, gentleman at the back. Yes.
There was some difficulty at the beginning of the meeting defining what religion was, so we know what we're talking about. Yes. I would define it as the Oxford Dictionary does, that it's belief in a superhuman controlling power. Now, I just wonder if you agree with that, but if so, there's no evidence for it.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand your, sorry, I've forgotten your name, sir. David, gentleman from St. John. And I just want to be clear in my own mind what you were saying. So, are you saying that, in terms of what Terry was saying earlier, do you think Pakistan's society has been enriched by the fact that Sharia law is so active over there, and that Christian colleagues, for want of a better word, are wrong in the headline that Terry mentioned, where they're asking for secularism?
I hope by now it's fairly clear that I've said that there are forms of secularism that are benign and forms of secularism that are not. I do not believe in the violent coercion of another religious group by a religious group that happens at any one time to have political power. I think that's utterly antithetical to the gospel of Jesus Christ, the gospel I follow, the Lord I follow. And let me just be absolutely frank with you, where Christian traditions have indulged in that, they are utterly wrong. But that's not where we are in the current context in Britain, where the church has some role in the public sphere. Within the Pakistani context, where Sharia law does mete out violent retribution against people who are deemed heretics, then I can understand why Christians would call for that more benign form of equality and diversity, which can go by the name of secularism. My point about tonight's motion is it doesn't make the differentiation between militant secular humanism or any kind of militancy in the name of secularism and benign secularism. And let me say this again, because I know that the majority in this room won't be with me on my Christian faith, but come with me on the understanding of what we are supposed actually to be debating tonight. All religions should embrace secularism, when secularism is undefined in that motion, and as a matter of record has been wedded at times to the same violent coercion that religious fundamentalism has been wedded to at times too.
Okay,
Yes,
religions aren't defined either, but there we are. Two more questions. Ross, then the gentleman across here. And that would be it.
Well, fair enough, David. The motion doesn't precisely define secularism, but as I understand it, I take it to be a separation between the state and religious organisations. The point I'd like to make is that if we look at some societies where there was such separation, but that's coming to an end, I think with very negative consequences. If we take the case of Iran, now I know it wasn't a bundle of joy under the Shah, but there was religious toleration on the whole. Look at what's happened since there's been a religious state. There's been the persecution of all people of all religions, including many Muslims. Let's take the former Soviet Union and Poland. If we take the case of the former Soviet Union, the Soviet state tolerated the Orthodox Church to a degree, not very much. But now,
at times, not all the time.
yeah, and now the Orthodox Church is coming back in a big way. It's getting a lot of state support. And what's it doing? It is spreading, with the help of the state, very reactionary doctrines like anti-Semitism, misogyny, homophobia, with state support. I was there a year ago, and there's massive state funds being poured into restoring religious buildings. So I think it would be better for people in Russia of other religions if there was a separation of religious organisations and the state.
It depends what you mean by separation of religion and the state. Too often it means pushing religion, as I've said, behind closed doors. And religions, particularly the great world religions, are public entities. They have in their very being a commitment to serve wider society for the good. And you know, in somewhere like Britain, it's a complex picture. We focused on England, but of course the church in Wales, Anglican, is disestablished. North of the border, there's the Presbyterian Church, which has a very different relationship to the nation of Scotland than the Church of England has. But both the Church in Wales and the Church of Scotland play an active role in public life, without the kind of link that still exists to some degree in the Church of England. So there are degrees, how can I put this? There are degrees of separation between the church and the state. But the very notion that religion itself would be pushed from the public square, and the very notion that there's any such thing as a neutral public square, needs to be scotched.
One more, and that final question.
Thank you. David, you mentioned Augustine. I was thinking previously of Aquinas, the 5 ways and all that, doubting Thomas. He famously came across to the belief that apostasy should be punished by death. That you'd think he was, you know, one of the top theologians of his time, and that's because the way that he thought he should control the way people spoke about religion. Now, that was 1,000 years ago now, and you're still telling us now how you think we should talk about religion in public square. So it's simply going to be a long, drawn-out process, this militant secularism. It's going to take years. Now, what worries me about this is, if you look at, we keep bringing it up because it's such a lovely example, Islam. Last year, the University of Cardiff did some research and found that 98% of Muslim children identified as Muslims. 10% higher than any other, which coincidentally were the subcontinent Sikh and Hindu type religions, and about 25% higher than Christians. Now the reason that that's so high, if you look at Morocco, it's 99.9992% Muslim. There's about 1,000 Christians still living in Morocco. And the reason it's so strong is just social conservatism. It's the strength, it's the power that religion has to convey how those people describe themselves. And that's still going on. Now, if you're 1,000 years away from Aquinas, and we've still got Muslims in England today saying they agree with death penalty, that's 1,000 years we've got to go to get Muslims to where you are now, if you think of that sort of evolution of religious thought. Now, what worries me here, when you talk about militant secularism, is that you're defending that power, that social conservatism that says religion has to have its space in the public square. Whereas other people, the Anabaptist, Jonathan Bartlett, who writes about post-Christendom, says, let's release religion into the marketplace of ideas and not give it that privileged space, that privileged social conservatism to contain people and to make people think that it means a special respect.
What is the question?
I think it was a statement rather than a question. But yeah, point taken, very, very well put actually. Well, we have one more, and that is very quickly.
I'd just like to add a little point to that, that as a feminist, I think that it is dangerous to allow religions, all religions, to have control in whatever way, because they've always treated women, all religions have treated women as second-class citizens, including all Christianity, and still do. And so what we need is secularism to protect women and give us a voice.
Bit of a problem for those many women across the church in the world who have opted in to become ordained ministers of the church and leaders of the church. Among whom include my wife, by the way.
How far have they got, the women? How far have they got in the Christian church?
Well, it depends where you are. Of course, it's sometimes a socio-cultural problem. But the trajectory of many churches in this country, of course, is to promote women to senior leadership positions. That includes my previous church, the United Reformed Church, whose General Secretary was a woman for the last few years, and will include very shortly a number of women, among whom I count many friends, who I hope will go on and become bishops. Well, you need to ask them, but there's as much diversity in the, I hope this is clear, the diversity among secularists going from militant, violent, fundamentalist secularists who have imposed what I think I might probably call Stalin or Pol Pot or Mao militant secularists. I think that they didn't really believe that religion had a place in the public square, and they meted that view out with violence. I think that there's we need to be fair to each other here. There's as much diversity in the interpretation of secularism as there is in the interpretation of religion. Sometimes baleful, sometimes not. And again, look at the motion. It simply talks about secularism, doesn't define it.
Can I just say, because I didn't say I wanted to question, but I feel,
Very quickly.
you know, can I say that I'm on David's side, and that one of the things while Terry was speaking that I did feel that he didn't really explain to us is to what is secularism, and surely the philosophy of secularism can change with time, and there could become a secularism that is not acceptable to many people in this room.
Yeah, I'm not too sure that's too many actually. But I'm very sorry that we didn't define the word that, we didn't define the word this, we didn't define the word house or believes or all or religions. You know, just where do you end with this? You can go on forever. You know exactly what we mean by secularism.
You said you were going to be neutral.
Yeah, I am neutral, but I'm finished. neutrality is finished. I am sick and tired of this riddle that I've just heard tonight. Anyway, I now have to tell us.
So much for free speech.
Yeah, well, I'm allowed free speech. Unfortunately, in the 13th century, anyone who dared, had the temerity to say anything like this at all would have been burnt at the bloody stake by these people. Don't forget. They would gladly have done it. So, right, have you ever voted that? The vote is that this House believes all religions should embrace secularism. Can we have a vote for the motion? Okay, put your hands down. Those against the motion?
Thanks, Mum.
Yep. Very much well. Thank you very much.
What's about abstention?
Are there any abstentions? Oh, this one. There's one abstention. Not that they actually counts. Okay. Those voted for, 27. Those against, 7. Or possibly 8. Okay, the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Can I just, nothing to do with the debate, I promise. Can I just thank you again for the invitation. It wasn't quite Daniel in the Lion's Den. It sometimes got close, but it wasn't, honestly. And just can I say that Terry's always welcome to come and debate the same motion at St John's College, Nottingham. Just to give you a sense of what it felt like tonight.
We do now have a bar.
Well, we do actually. That may surprise you, but we do. So you're very welcome. Thank you.